Hello and welcome to RCTV. I'm here with Sam Lee. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Seb.
For those of you that are not familiar with the Northisle story, it's a Vancouver-based company that currently owns one of the most promising copper-gold porphyry deposits in Canada. Located on Vancouver's North Island, the North Island project has access to premier infrastructure in a mining-friendly community and makes it one of the most attractive copper development stories currently in Canada. What are you most excited to see at this year's PDAC?
Well, just to be here in person. This is actually the first time I've attended PDAC as a corporate. So about 27 years ago, I attended as a student, and then over the last 20 years, I attended as an investment banker. And last year, of course, due to the pandemic, there was not a conference in person. So this is truly exciting to see people that I haven't seen for many, many years.
Well, you're aging yourself there when you say 27 years ago. You've aged quite well.
Well, I have to say there's been an incredible progression, or perhaps even a regression of events over the past 27 years. So, but it's good to see everyone out. It's a great conference, and I'd be very happy to see what comes out of it.
Nice. Well, it's good to have you here. And for those of you that, or those that don't know Northisle, what's the first thing off the hop that you would tell them?
It's a medium capital intensity project from a copper perspective with a massive gold credit, right? So you've defined us rightfully so as a copper porphyry. That's about 64% of our revenue, but our gold component is absolutely enormous. We've got, defined through our PEA, approximately 100,000 ounces of gold production a year for 22 years. That's in addition to approximately 100 billion pounds of copper production a year. So truly a robust project.
Well, it's obviously a great project, and I know this, but I also know that people very much so invest in the individual. So maybe there's a little something about your background that people should know about you.
Sure. So I'm a metallurgist by training. So my thesis actually was on a copper gold porphyry that came out of Chile back in the 90s. I went into investment banking through, I guess, the super cycle, so 2000 to 2011. That was probably the most active point of my investment banking career. Worked on over $100 billion of M&A transactions and equity transactions. So I know which projects resonate at any point in the cycle. This is certainly a different cycle that we're seeing now versus the last super cycle. I think this cycle certainly is driven off of the same narratives, electrification, but the rest of the world is effectively replicating what China was doing as part of the cycle circa 2001 to 2011. China, if everyone remembers, was urbanizing, and through that urbanization process, electrification was the motif, and therefore copper hit its historical highs in the peak of 2011, $4.70. This time around, the cycle certainly, it's not being driven by China as much. Obviously not 11.5% GDP growth, but closer to 5.5%, however off a much bigger base. But the rest of the world has certainly hung on to this electrification narrative, driven mostly by carbon neutrality, carbon net zero, which we're seeing mobilized through governments and in companies throughout the world.
Well, it's definitely a good description of the industry now versus how it was maybe when you dipped your toes in. But I know you recently also added Ian Chang as VP Project Development. Would you say that your team's sort of rounded out and full now?
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. Like when I joined, obviously the core group of individuals are people that have, found, built, and sold projects very similar to this. Dale Corman's our chairman, just got inducted to the Canadian Hall of Fame. He's probably best known for developing Penasquito, selling it to Goldcorp for $1.2 billion, Goldcorp Glamis, rather. Then we obviously have individuals like Kevin O'Kane, who has worked as the chief mining engineer for BHP for many, many years at the neighboring Island Copper mine, for which we obviously are blessed with the infrastructure that has been developed as related to that mine. So it's someone who's actually built the mine there. My predecessor, Jack McClintock, who was responsible for discovering Spence, which is obviously one of BHP's more prolific mines today. He put this package together under the guidance of Dale Corbin. The core team was really formed as a result of putting these people together, and then over the course of the last year and a half, my objective was obviously build the supporting team to make sure that we can advance this project as we described. So Ian obviously was a person I worked with. I IPO'd Pretium back in 2010. Ian was employee number 5 at Pretium. He essentially took the Bruce Jack project from discovery and developed it into detailed engineering. As you say, that was really the last piece of the puzzle for our team. I guess the individuals that I hired over the last year and a half included Nick Van Dyke, who's our CFO, many years as a banker, also has worked at Polaris as an executive, someone who has a very deep experience as it relates to how to work in the region that we're in. And then, of course, we have Robin Tolbert, who's our VP Exploration, who succeeded Jack McClintock, over 40 years of exploration expertise within copper porphyries globally. And then Michelle Tanguay, who's the head of our sustainability, environment and communities, which obviously is going to be a very critical component to moving this project forward.
We'll get to sustainability a little bit later on, but I know that you released a PEA, and obviously in pretty short order. I mean, the company hasn't been around for that long, and you guys have been able to deliver a PEA already, and that's probably thanks to the team, but maybe there's some highlights that you want to go and go through about that study.
Sure, absolutely. So as you think about projects, right, this is a medium capital intensity project for a copper project, so it's about $1 billion NPV 8% after tax. This is done at $3.25 copper and $16.50 gold. That yields approximately a 19.9% IRR, which is very high for a 22-year mine life, right? So think of this as a very long life project. And then, of course, the gold component is approximately 100,000 ounces of recoverable gold production a year for those 22 years, right? So if you think about this in a cash flow perspective, the PEA yields approximately $350 million of free cash flow for the first 10 years. So this is a very, very significant, high margin project that is attractive, will be very, very attractive to a number of incumbents moving forward.
And I mean, I think we can all agree that when companies release PEAs, unless they have something to go and create sizzle on the back of that, which you do, they sometimes sort of stagnate. But that was the North Island PEA that you spoke of, but there's also got Northwest Expo, which are trying to go and delineate a gold-rich resource at. What are your plans, and what do you think the timeline is going to be to bring out a resource on that?
Sure, absolutely. So our company right now is underpinned by the 5 billion pounds of copper equivalent that is essentially encapsulated in our PEA, right? And this is the base valuation for which your analysts, other analysts on the street that have essentially established their target prices and are suggesting that we're trading approximately about 4% of our net asset value, right? So companies of our stage should be trading around 0.2 to 0.4 times if you were to look at our comp set. So this is a very important aspect. So even without anything else, we don't do anything else, right? This project should be supporting a valuation of something closer to 5 times what we're trading at today. And so this is what essentially brought in one of our key strategic investors, Michael Gentili, in the company. So he has now amassed a 9.9% interest in our company. He has relied on very significant individuals, including Pierre Baudouin, who also has invested into our company as well. Pierre is best known for being the COO, ex-COO of Detour. Obviously, Detour got sold, and the current COO of Silvercrest. And so the relevance of that is when you talk about our PEA and some of the underlying assumptions that make our project great, which is predominantly infrastructure and very low strip ratio and access to roads and power, and a port and a town just about 20-minute drive away on a paved road. These are things that are critically important to people like Pierre and, of course, Kevin O'Kane, who know how to build and operate mines. So with that aside, that is our underpinning valuation where we are clearly not achieving the valuations that we should be achieving. The second part of it is Northwest Expo, right? So we're talking about a zone that is only about 3 kilometers away from our project along a pre-existing trucking road right now. What we announced a couple of months ago was a delineation of about 40 to 50 million tons of new mineralization of in and around 1 to 1.2 grams per ton of gold equivalent, and that's approximately 0.9 percent copper equivalent, right? So this is within the copper porphyry, which is very significant. When people talk about these grades, this is very high grade for a copper porphyry. In fact, it's probably 2 times the gold grade you'd find in a copper porphyry globally, and it's certainly about 4 to 5 times the gold grade that we currently have in our resource base. And so what we've set out to do for this year, 2022, is define that 40 to 50 million tons of in and around 1 to 1.2 grams per ton of gold equivalent, or 0.9% copper equivalent, and to establish an incremental resource. And I think this is significant in many respects. A, it's right beside our project, so you can easily consider vending it into our current project economics, so that would, just given the grade itself, as I said, from a gold perspective, is about 4 to 5 times a higher grade than our current resources. That could potentially displace the first, call it 10 years of production of lower grade material that is currently being contemplated into the mill. The second possibility, and it's a trade-off that Ian will be working on, is what does this project look like as a smaller, lower capital intensity project, right? So right now, currently the project is defined as a 75,000 ton per day project, $1.1 billion capex, which is, as I said, medium capital intensity for a copper project, but from a gold perspective, a very, very large project, right? So does this give us the ability to reconfigure where we put our infrastructure from Hushamu to Northwest Expo, Red Dog area, make the project smaller, 15 to 20,000 tons per day, and lower capital intensity and potentially higher IRR. So that's a very, very much similar model to what Artemis did with Blackwater. My very strong view is that we are in kind of the third to fourth innings of a major copper cycle. And so, as we all know, when we approach the 6th to 7th innings of these copper cycles, you want your project to get bigger, not smaller, right? So I do understand the starter pit concept. I think it's a very important concept for projects in the kind of first to third innings of a cycle, because capital intensity is a very key marker for people's investors' appetite for projects. And so I personally believe that ship has sailed. We're now past that precipice in the cycle, but it's always good to define a project that is, robust at any point in the cycle, which I think is, again, the real significance of Northwest Expo.
No, that's awesome. And you did touch on Hushamu as well. What exploration plans do you have to advance there, and what role will sort of infill drilling play on the success of the program? Yeah,
so on a global basis, we have almost a billion tons of resource material indicated and inferred, right? And that is really the threshold for the big incumbents, the BHPs, the Rios. A billion tons is where you start. So we're almost there. Hushamu is one of these deposits that kind of keep on going at similar type grades, and you can establish that level pretty quickly. But what we've done recently, and as per our last press release, we've identified that the infill drilling that essentially attaches the higher grade zones to the much lower grade zones is continuing along a higher grade trend, right? So the way that resource estimates today are created is that if you have a high grade zone and a low grade zone and a lot of space between them, you just essentially average it out to the lower grade. So what we've released recently is that towards the west end of our pit shell, as we go to that lower grade zone towards the west, we continually see the higher grade copper zones, which is at this point approximately 0.8 to 0.9% copper equivalent. And so that's quite significant, and we believe that the reason why it drops precipitously towards the edge of the pit shell is that there is a faulting system there, right? So I know a lot of people think infill drilling not that sexy, not that interesting, but in this case it's actually very interesting because you can potentially significantly increase the grade profiles of the overall resource right now, which is also another key focus for our program at Hushamu.
No, that's awesome. So we touched on sort of great management with a good track record of success. We touched on the sort of three legs of the stool project and how we can tie them all together. And then I'd be remiss if we didn't touch on the good work that you guys are doing on a CSR front. Can
Yes.
you touch on that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, man, I think that every cycle has different trends, right? And certainly the last cycle was to satisfy demand of China, and it was all hands on deck and tonnage grade. That was the things that were driving the last cycle. Tonnage more than grade. This cycle is different. You don't have the same effect that China had, obviously, on the demand side, but you do for the rest of the world. So you will have that insatiable appetite for copper, which I mentioned before. But probably more importantly is the question of where are you going to put the waste, and do you have the social license? And what are you going to do around the surrounding environment as it relates to your disruptive activity? Because mining is a disruptive activity as it relates to this land. And I think that has become more and more prevalent in how everyone thinks, not only just investors, but incumbents and governments alike. And the wonderful thing about being in BC, which is where our project is BC has one of the best established infrastructures to go through a permitting process, right? And so whilst it is probably takes longer, at least relative to in the past, to permit a project in BC, you have assurance because it goes through the right steps. I believe the rest of the world, including the Chile and Peru, who are looking to reconfigure their system to essentially gain the trust of its people and social license that it's clearly lacking today. I think they are going to be looking at jurisdictions like BC to establish that framework to ensure that social license, the assurance of having a project just continue on with limited disruption. That's going to be the goal for these countries, right? Because it starts from the top. So. From that perspective, I think that our system works and is entirely relevant for future mining, and we're seeing a lot of the incumbents coming back into Canada. Canada used to be one of the top 3, top 5 copper producers in the world. That all migrated to South America in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. We're seeing that coming back because obviously that level of aggressiveness has caused social disparity within those countries. And so what we now focus on is we've got the system in place, the government system in place. They have been very supportive of this project. The government has created an initiative called the BC RMA. And what that initiative of in 2015 was to bring awareness to BC through the Golden Triangle. So the Golden Triangle, as I said, I IPO'd Pretium in 2010. That was really the reintroduction of the Golden Triangle back into the fray in terms of mining activity. I think they did a wonderful job of doing that. And then the government did a very good job of then creating awareness that there are many other companies, including Ascot, Skeena, and Dolly Varden, that are now advancing projects within a very prolific area. And that has worked out incredibly well for the government. And so now that they are looking at Golden Triangle version 2.0 through this BCRMA organization, and we've been identified as one of the 3 companies. So now they're looking elsewhere. They've identified the North Island is a very prolific area in terms of geological prospectivity. It's obviously got historical mining with BHP's Island Copper Mine. It's a forestry focused area. And then the third industry is fishing, right? So if you look at those 3 industries, the industry that can provide the most jobs, the most prosperity, the most collaboration with our First Nation land partners is mining, right? This is the most significant thing. So we have now advanced very many discussions with obviously the province all the way up to the Premier's level to Deputy Mines Minister Peter Robb, who's extremely supportive of this, of what we're doing moving ahead. And of course, we've spoken to Minister Ralston just recently, and he's provided his the confidence that there's no difference permitting a project in BC versus the northern part of Vancouver Island, which is where we are. In fact, where we are is actually probably more appealing because it has that pre-existing infrastructure. But essential to all of this is our First Nation relationships and partnerships. And so we deal at this point with 3 First Nation partners, which is a manageable, I think, size. And then, of course, we are targeting participation agreements, which is a precursor to our IBA with them that defines, how we can interact with them, how the capacity that they can receive as part of this interaction and this collaboration, and just bringing the awareness and their input into the project at a very early stage. So we're preempting all of the government processes that are currently being put in place, such that when we are ready to submit our project description and EA, this really will be an exercise of us going arm in arm with our land partners and saying we are we're ready, and we've consulted and we've collaborated as to what the right look for this project is. So that's the only way that you expedite things in BC. You have to do it from first principles. We're doing it from first principles, and quite frankly, it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think other companies can take a page out of your management book there, because I know that's been at the forefront of importance to you guys. So well done on that front.
Thank you.
You did mention earlier, though, in Chile and Peru, and obviously Chile and Peru have some significant copper projects and copper development projects. How would you, just to tie it all together, go and plot yourself on the map of other development projects out there?
Yeah, it's a good question. Why don't I start with a macro vision, right? So, of course, people have, I'm sure, seen the forecast prognostication soothsayer saying, 8 to 10 million tons of copper deficit by 2030, okay? So that, for people that don't know that's 8 to 10 of the largest mines, 8 to 10 Escondidas, that not only have to be in production, but have to be found. Right, so Escondido was a 3% copper mine, right? I don't think there's anything like that has been discovered that hasn't already been inputted into that forecast, right? And we all know it takes about 15 years to build a mine, and that just mathematically does not jive with the supply-demand curve. So what's going to happen? Copper is going to go through the roof. Projects like this are going to be absolutely critical. Projects being developable projects. We're not going to be the solution for 8 to 10 million tons, but it's that incremental production that is going to be critical to the need, an insatiable need for copper. Like, for example, it does take 5 to 6 times more copper to build an electric vehicle than it does an internal combustion vehicle, right? And that sort of order of magnitude is very similar for wind farms, solar panels, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there is no, I think there's no doubt that there is not enough copper right now in the inventory to really satisfy that demand. Then how do we rank in terms of, specifically in terms of copper projects in Peru? Well, let me tell you, or Peru and Chile. It's much easier to find projects in those areas because it's arid and you don't have the same top cover that we have, right? So we have this massive system called Pemberton Hills, which is just between ourselves and BHP's Island Copper Mine, and it bubbles out to the surface, even past the trees and the bush, and you see it for like 6.5 kilometers, 1.5 kilometers wide, and last year's drilling program unfortunately showed that it goes about 1.5 kilometers deep. Right? 1 kilometer deep. So something like this, as it's been described to me, because I'm not a geologist, but as it's been described to me, something like this, if it were in Chile, would be drilled like Swiss cheese, right? It is so obvious that this is a massive system. We're talking about systems like in Indonesia, right? We're not talking about smaller systems. This would be drilled like Swiss cheese. And so from that perspective, exploration is probably a little bit easier in Chile than it is in certainly BC, but at least we've identified it. We've identified this system, this area, and it's, again, within a very short distance of our project and BHP's, more importantly, BHP's Island Copper project, which currently has a deep sea water port, which is the closest deep sea water port from continental America to Japan, which is where they sold their concentrate. In terms of other distinctive factors, well, we get 2.9 meters of rain in our area, right? So water quality, water control is exceedingly important. Really, the two things that the government has said that, the only way you can mess this up is obviously, if you don't deal with First Nations appropriately and you don't deal with the water properly, right? Chile, you don't have that problem, but in Chile, you don't have any water, period. So the reference that I always make is I'd much rather build a water treatment plant than a desalination plant. There's a factor of about 100 in terms of how expensive and capital expenditure, and water arguably is one of the most important commodities in this world, right? We have an excess amount of it. So again, this is an engineering feat that we will certainly get our heads around, and again, the importance of having Ian Chang on the team. And then politically, as I said, there's this wonderful chart that shows, Canada's, regression in terms of the world scale, or BC's regression in terms of world scales in terms of copper production, and then the ascent of South America, led by Chile and Peru, to the point where, Chile, Peru, these are the top 3 copper producing nations in the world today. I think there is a recognition that came at a cost. It came at the cost of social license and expediting, really incredibly prospective projects, and obviously now incredible mines. And so there is going to be a rebalance, I believe very strongly, around the significance of Canada, and again, the infrastructure and the legislative branches that provide the path forward, the framework to permit these types of mines. I don't think Canada is going to get any faster permitting mines, but I don't think Chile or Peru or any of these other jurisdictions are going to continue on the pace of rapidly approving these mines at the cost of social disruption. So we're starting to see that evolve reasonably fast. Certainly BHP has moved their exploration headquarters from Santiago, Chile to Toronto, Canada. We've seen a tremendous amount of M&A in BC, specifically with Newmont acquiring GT Gold, Newcrest acquiring Red Chris and Pretium. And I think certainly the discussions I've had with Minister Ralston and others is that BC is open for business.
I love it. Well, I think we can all agree that we think that electrification is on the way, and you guys are definitely at the forefront of that change. So I did see your schedule, so I know you're super busy during the PDAC, but we really do appreciate you taking the time to come in and see us today, and we look forward to what's to come.
Thank you very much, Seb. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, Seb.
Cheers.